All right, so hey everyone, welcome to the backend lecture for Node.js, Npm, and Express. So we have just talked about React, and I believe with us finishing React 2 lecture, you should have a decent understanding of the React front-end framework. And now with all these front-end knowledge in place, we do need to have the backend structure to support for the front-end that we are building. And in order to achieve this, we're teaching you how to use Node.js and also Express. And I believe you are already very familiar with JavaScript by now. And you might notice that we can only run JavaScript in our browser so far using a script tag. And what if we want to write scripts using JavaScript and run them using our local machines instead of like running it in a browser? And this is where a framework called Node comes into play. It's a JavaScript runtime engine built on Chrome's engine. Essentially, it's kind of like a mini browser engine that allows you to run JavaScript in your own local computer, even without a browser. And this means that you are able to do a lot more with JavaScript. Things like managing local files, connecting and setting up a server, and also much more. And in this lecture, we are going to cover, first of all, what is NPM, and also how Node works. Then we'll move on to talk about how you can create any backend APIs using Node and Express. And then we are also going to briefly cover how to make API calls to other APIs using Axios. And we are going to end with a brief discussion on file system. If you're not unmuted, if you're not muted, please mute yourself. I do hear some echoes. Thanks, Bob. All right, now let's get started. If you want to follow along, this Notion page is linked in the Slack channel. And all the code is like on the Notion page. And I will upload the folder like once I finish the lecture. I will also upload it to the GitHub repo. So yeah, now let's get started. First of all, we have go ahead and created an example folder and cd into that folder. And now before we dive right in, let's talk about NPM. So first of all, what's NPM? We already know Node is kind of like a JavaScript runtime engine. And NPM is a Node package manager. And Node package manager is a place for developers to post any third-party packages, to create any third-party packages and upload it to the platform. So essentially, it's kind of like a platform, a store for all these third-party libraries. And as individual developers, you can also go on to NPM and download any package from NPM. And all packages in NPM are free to download, and it's very easy to do so. You can just do like NPM install, and then you will essentially grab the right package. So first of all, we need to install Node to use NPM. So how to install Node? Go to this link, and you can install Node.js for free. If you're following along any React.js lecture, you should already have Node installed, because to use React, you do need to have Node. And just to double check, you have successfully installed Node. In the terminal, if you type node.v, node-v, you will see the version number, also npm-v. Okay. And now let's dive right in and build our first packages. Let me put it here. Okay. So how do we create a Node package? We do so by using npm init. And npm, if you only do npm init, it's going to ask you for a lot of information. For instance, like the package name, the author name, the creation date, a bunch of questions. By using the -y flag, it will just kind of like set everything to default, makes your life easier. So let's do that. And as you can see, after I run npm and then -y, there's a JSON response returned. It created the package name under our current folder name. The folder name right now we're in is express -demo. And there's also a version number and optional description. There's also a main field. The main field is essentially the entry for our server or the entry for our package. I'll talk about that later. There's also some optional test script. We won't use that at all. So yeah. And after you run npm init-y, you can see there's a package.json file created. And let's see what it is about. So as you can see, if we click on the package.json file, it's exactly the thing that's returned inside the terminal. So essentially, this is kind of like a configuration file for npm. And with this configuration, the npm can identify your package easily. All right. So right now we have the package in place. And let's say we want to install some Node packages, because we do need to rely on some other third-party package to build our software. We can't build everything from ground up. So let's install this package called Axios. So Axios is a very, very powerful package that allows you to create API requests to other APIs. So for instance, if you see some Trello API that can help you dial a phone number and you think it's like, actually, yeah, and you think it's really interesting. And then you can use Axios to call their APIs. So how to install a package? You use npm install followed by the package name. And also, you can shorthand install for I, and this is what I'm doing right now. So as you can see, to install Axios, you just need to write npm I Axios. And after you hit enter, it will handle it for you. And if you say this plus Axios followed by the version number, it says Axios. It's like indicating Axios is installed properly. Right now, if we look at the file structure, we see there are actually a couple more files or folders appear in our folder. So there's another file called package-log.json. This package is essentially kind of like another configuration file, but this configuration is used to keep track of all the packages that we have installed and also the version number. So for instance, if you look at the dependencies, here it says Axios, and there's also some metadata related to the package, for instance, the version number, the result, and what that is, but essentially a bunch of information. And this is also used, this will also used by npm. And so essentially, if you decided to publish this package to the outside world, other developers can simply run npm I to install all the packages that this package needs based on the package-log.json file. Okay. Any questions so far for all the things that we have gone through? So essentially npm init, also npm install.
I had a quick question. After we like do the init, do we just like copy paste like the JSON code into like a new JSON file in Visual Studio?
Oh, so the package.json file is created automatically after you run npm init. And yeah, all these files are created kind of like automatically, so you don't really need to handle anything.
Oh, wait, so how do you find the file? Like,
it's within, so if you run npm init inside the folder, the package.json file will directly be under that particular folder.
Oh, okay. But I did, so after that, I did like ls like package.json, but like, it didn't really like, it gave me like a weird error, so I wasn't sure if it actually got created.
You probably need to do like just ls, and
Okay.
yeah, if you do this, you should be able to see package.json.
Okay. Okay.
Do we have any other questions, concerns? All right, now let's get started with our very first Node.js program. And let's create a file called hello world.js. So if you don't know, touch will create an empty file with the name followed by it. And so let's go to hello world.js. Let's see console.log hello world. And to run any node.js file, you do node followed by the file name hello world.js. And if you hit enter, you can see that hello world is being printed on screen. And you might notice that this JavaScript that we are writing right now is very similar to the JavaScript inside browser. So usually we do console.log hello world in a browser. You will also print out hello world inside the console, which is in the browser. But right now instead it's printing in the terminal. So essentially the JavaScript used for Node.js and the JavaScript within the browser is very similar with each other. However, there are some differences. For instance, if you're importing a package, this is how you will import a package inside Node.js. It's kind of different from how you will install, how you will import a package inside the browser. And also, there are a few functions that's missing inside Node.js. So for instance, there's a fetch function inside JavaScript inside browser. The fetch function is used to, if you remember from JavaScript 3 lecture, it's used to call any APIs and fetch data from it. However, there's no fetch function at all in Node.js. As a result, this is why we use Axios, because Axios kind of just appears as a substitute for fetch function. And you might notice since we are working with a terminal right now, we don't really have a browser to work with, which means that any Windows object, when we don't have any Windows object, we don't have any documents object. So for instance, let's go to a browser. Let's just go to Google. Oops, Google Form, that works too. And if we go to the console here, and if we type out window, as you can see, there's actually something belongs to the window variable. We can also do window.document. As you can see, the document is kind of like the entire HTML. However, if you do the same thing here, like if you're trying to console.log window.document, if you do this, you will see that it shows window is not defined. This is because since we are no longer working with a browser, we don't have a window at all. Alrighty, any questions so far for our very basic Node.js program or kind of like JavaScript for Node in general. Alrighty, now let's move on. So we have our very first Hello World program in place. However, we do want to build more than a Hello World program. So let's get started with kind of like the main goal of today's lecture, which is building a web server using Node and also Express. So let's first of all create a new file called index.js. And as you might recall, if you look at package.json, it says the main here. It's index.js. Essentially, what this means is that when another user is trying to use this package, if they run this particular package, index.js is going to be the first thing that the package executes. It's kind of like a main function in Python. So yeah, and usually we'll just put every thing inside the index.js file. And to create a web server, we do need to use something called Express. Express is a web package that allows us to set up web server in a very fast and also pretty simple way. It abstracts away many of the kind of like annoying details of how to handle like API calls, how to do web interfaces essentially. So let's go ahead and install it first of all. So right now we have Express in place. If we take a look at the package -log.json file, as you can see, we have a bunch of new packages installed. This is because the Express itself is a pretty big package and it comes with quite a lot of other packages. But as you can see here, Express is listed, so we're good. And now, also you can see it here inside dependencies for our package. And this is kind of like an indication of Express being installed successfully. And now let's build our very first Hello World server. We can get rid of Axios actually for now. And as you can see, we can leave it here. So this is how we will build a web server using Express. First of all, we require Express, and this is essentially a way for us to import the package into the index.json file. And after we import it, we call it using, we just directly call the package, and the package will return an object. And this object is very powerful as this is kind of like the entry point for us to build the web server. And it has a bunch of very, very cool methods that we'll be learning in this lecture. So one of the very first methods called .get. .get is essentially saying that every time this web server receives a GET request at this particular URL, it will do the following inside this function. Okay, and inside this function, so app.get, it takes in like essentially two parameters. First of all, this is a URL. The first parameter is a URL. The second parameter is a function. And this particular function needs to have two variables. The first is a request. Second is a response. And if we use response.send, and then we can directly send back a string using this function. And essentially, kind of like the main flow of this function is that when a user send a GET request to our web server, we will send back a hello world to them. And this is essentially what this function is trying to do. There are also a bunch of other functions. For instance, there are get requests. There's also post requests. And if you want to do something regarding post request, it's essentially the same syntax. You do post and then followed by a function. Okay. And now let's take a look at this function. This is app.listen, and it's listening on the port 3000. And so you can also change it to, for instance, like 8000 or 8080. It's up to you, but right now we're using 3000. Doesn't really matter which port you choose, as long as you're choosing something that's like not prohibited by the computer. And once you call app.listen, the app will start listening for all the requests coming in from the user. And this particular function right here, this is a callback function. It's essentially saying once the app starts to listen on this particular port, it will do the following. And in our case, it's just simply logging, saying that the example app is listening at this URL. I know this might be a lot to take in, but let's actually go ahead and run the code and see what do we have. So to run this, let's do node index.js. And right now, as you can see, it shows example app listening at localhost 3000. So let's go to localhost 3000. As you can see, there's hello world now displayed inside the browser. And essentially, this hello world is a, so why the browser will shows up a hello world is because when we visit the browser in this link, it will automatically send a GET request to this particular link. And since we're simply looking at the root URL, which means it's simply like this URL, and this URL is essentially like this URL. This is 3000 here, okay? And when it sends a GET request to our web server, it will go to this particular function and then send back a hello world. And this is how essentially the GET requests work. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Quick question: is the browser sending the GET request?
Yeah. In this case, the browser is sending a GET request. Okay. So essentially, if you visit any browser, if you visit any website, you are essentially sending a GET request to that particular URL that you are visiting.
Right. Okay.
And usually to work with backend development, we use something called the Postman. And here I've already opened it up. And Postman is a tool that allows us to send requests. And so for instance, a GET request, usually you can do that by using browser. However, if we want to send some other requests, Postman is a little bit more easier to use. So let's say we want to use a Postman, and here we are sending a GET request to this particular link. And let's click send. As you can see, as a response, it returned hello world inside here. So this is essentially very, very handy when we are doing any backend development. And we can create, for instance, another request, and then there are a bunch of HTTP methods to choose from. So yeah, we'll be using the Postman quite a lot throughout this course. Do we have any other questions for the GET methods and listen method? All right, now let's move on and start to add more routes. So this is something called a route. A route is essentially saying that when the user visits this URL, and in our case, it's kind of like the root URL, it will be redirected to this function and it will be sent a hello world back. And to add more routes, we can simply, for instance, we can simply do another get app.get. And this time, let's say we want to, actually, let's just copy and paste it here, easier. Okay, and now let's go through what we have written. So leave this to now as optional. All right. So right now, as you can see, we are actually trying to build a pretty dumb databases, and it's called StupidDB. And the database, why it's called StupidDB is that once the server is like finished running, it won't actually store any data into the local like computer. This is because we haven't taught you how to actually use the database yet. So this is what we will settle with. However, the database is still pretty useful. Right now, the StupidDB is an object, and we also have a counter. Essentially, the users, we want the users to use post requests to send data inside our StupidDB. And the goal is to keep track of all the user data that the user sent to us and indexing them accordingly. And to achieve this end, we are also providing the user with a set of APIs. So for instance, one of our routes is at /info/index. And /info/index at this particular route, the user can get the current index of the database. So essentially, if there are like 3 items stored inside database, the user will then get a 3. And if there's no items stored in the database, they will get a 0. And we also have an API called info/capacity. Info/capacity is essentially getting the capacity of our database, essentially how many data we are storing right now. We're also going to build something called db/all. This is essentially returning all the items stored in the StupidDB object. We're also going to allow user to get one certain item from the database. And essentially our database structure is going to look something like this. So it'll be like this, and it'll be one orange, for instance, orange, and 2 banana. So this is essentially how the data structure will look like. And for the user, if they want to get a certain item from the database, for instance, the first one, they can, for instance, like the zeros one, I guess, since we index from zeros, they can just do /db/0 to get a certain item from the database. And for now, this is like all the APIs that we're going to build in this lecture. And let's get started with something pretty simple. So first of all, our homepage. And here we are doing, for our homepage is essentially the root URL. And we are directly sending back StupidDB API. Actually, let's just say, welcome to StupidDB API to add more flares. So once we finish modifying it, let's run this node server again. And since we haven't changed our route yet, let's send the GET request to this particular route again. As you can see, right now it says, welcome to StupidDB API. And now let's take a look at our next route. This route is used to send the current index of our database. And our database is tracking the index simply by using a variable. So how will we send back this variable is directly sending this back. And we do this by using rest.send. So it's essentially the same thing here. And we wrap the variable inside the curly bracket as a JSON object. So right now, if you look at this, like the thing inside the curly bracket, right now it's only an object. However, when we call rest.send, Express will automatically convert it into a JSON object. So let's try this. Let's try using Postman. And this route is /info/index. So let's go to that route. Oh, actually, let's build a new request. So get, copy and paste this, info/index. Let's save it to Express demo. And if we hit send, as you can see, we get back counter equals to 0. And you might notice that there's a quotation mark surrounding counter. And this is because with the help of Express, it will automatically convert the object to a JSON object. And inside the JSON object, everything is wrapped inside double quotation mark. So this is our info/index route. It returns it simply returns a counter number. Do we have any questions so far?
Should we already downloaded like or installed Postman?
If you haven't, feel free to download it. But Postman is a pretty useful tool. I think you can just find it by Google it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you haven't, please download it. It's pretty useful. And to use it, it's pretty straightforward. You can just like create a new folder or a new request here. And then you can choose the request type here. And then you can like input the URL that you try to get a request from here. So yeah, kind of like a very brief intro to Postman. All right, and now let's move on to the second route. Actually, technically the third route. And this route is for us to get the capacity of our database. And the capacity essentially is just the size of this stupid DB. And to be honest, we can simply return a counter. However, we can do it like this. And right now we are doing it like object.keys stupid DB. This will return essentially an array of keys inside stupid DB. And once we have an array, we call .length. And this will give us kind of like the number of name and value pair inside stupid DB object. There's a question in chat, why doesn't stupid DB need a let in front of it? Oh yeah, good catch. We should probably do a const in front of it. So usually because JavaScript is a pretty dynamic language, if you forget to put like a let or a const in front of a variable, they will just do var. So it will default to like, right now, because stupid DB is like, we're not really going to modify it. We're just going to add it by appending to it. So we can make it a constant. Okay. And now let's try to get the capacity. So let's change it to capacity here. And if we hit send, As you can see, it shows capacity equal to 0. This is because we don't have anything in it. We can actually just add something in. So let's do 0 orange. And the counter, it should actually be 1 right now. Oops, we do need to rerun the server. And as you can see, if we add an orange in and run the capacitor again, it will return capacity equals to 1. So yeah, this is just kind of like another way for us to keep track of the capacity of the database. Let's go ahead and rerun the server. All right. And now let's move on to these 2 routes. And these 2 routes are also 2 GET requests routes. And one's at /db/all, and the other's at /db ID. Okay, let me get my charger real quick. Sorry about that. Need to charge my computer. All right. And if you look at /db/all, this is a method to get all items from the database. And how we'll do that, since stupid_db is an object already, we can simply pass it through rest.send. And rest.send will automatically convert this object into a JSON object. Okay. And since we don't have anything right now, this probably won't be that exciting, but let's see. So let's go to b/all and hit send. As you can see, it's an empty curly bracket. This is because we haven't added anything into it yet. Let's try to actually hard code something here. So for instance, let's still do 0 orange. Let's refresh again. As you can see, right now it shows up as 0 orange. And oh, there's no long install. That's sad. Okay. So right now, let's go ahead and delete our hard-coded 0 orange. We'll be working on kind of like adding, allowing the user to add their customized items into DB later in the post and the put route. But right now, we also have another route called DB and then followed by ID. And as you can see, there's a column in front of ID. And this is actually saying match anything after the /db. Okay, and this is essentially matching this kind of route. So db, if you do like 1, 2, 3, and then inside this function, ID will then be 1, 2, 3. Okay, and how you can get access to the ID is by using the request object. As you might see, we haven't used the request object at all right now. We have only been using the response object. So for the request object is used to get all the inputs from the user's request. So for instance, right now we are matching the ID inside the URL parameters. We can do that by request.params.id. And this way, we can match the ID here after the database. What we can do here is do console.log ID just to see what do we get. Okay. Now let's rerun the browser again. And inside this function, we are first of all checking whether the ID is inside stupid.db. And if it's inside stupid.db, we're going to send back the corresponding item. And if it's not, we'll say no object found with this particular ID. And now let's try to access, say, db0. As you can see, it says no object found with this ID because we don't really have anything in it. However, if we hard-coded 0 orange, and let's rerun our index.js, let's send it again. As you can see, we get back orange. So this is essentially how do we get a certain item from the database for the user. Do we have any questions so far for all the GET requests that we have just implemented? Oh, and by the way, it prints out 0 here. This is because we have console.log ID. As you can see, the DB right now is DB/0. And the request of parameters ID, the thing that we are logging out is also 0. This means that we are getting the ID correctly. Okay. Any questions so far? Does this all make sense to you all?
I have a quick question. When we do const id equals rec.params.id, what exactly is params.id again?
Yeah, so the request object has a lot of different attributes. And one of them is the params. And the params is essentially, it's saying that using this kind of like matching pattern and use this matching pattern to match whatever URL that we have. So right now, so for instance, we are visiting this, the user is sending a GET request to this particular URL. And this particular URL, as you can see at the end, it matches like right here. It matches the db/id format. And if it matches this format, the ID will have the value of 0. And if you change it to, for instance, 123, it will be 123. And to access this ID variable, we do it by using request.params.id. And later, if the user puts something in, instead of in the URL parameters, if it puts something inside the body, we are going to do something like request.body.blah, blah, blah. And this is just essentially different ways to access kind of like user inputs.
Okay.
All right. Cool. So right now we have all the GET requests in place. However, the user doesn't really have a way to create or to add any items into the database. So let's do that. What we need to have is another two requests. One is a post request and the other is a put request. Okay. And for the post request, so if you recall from our REST development lecture, the post request is usually used when a user fill out a form, and then so for instance, if it's a to-do list app, the user wants to create a new to-do, they will fill out a form and then submit. And usually the front-end developer after the user clicks submit, they will let the user send a post request to the backend database. And this is where our post request comes into place. To handle a post request, you do app.post followed by the URL. And you might notice that we're doing something pretty similar to app.get. And for instance, here for this put request, we're actually repeating the routes. This is okay to do because even though the route is the same, we're using different methods on the route. So we are okay. We won't have any conflicts. And now let's go back to the post request. So usually post request, it comes with also a body. So the body inside the request is kind of essentially like a paragraph of text. Yeah, let's do route. And inside Postman, you can create post requests by simply changing get to post. And then inside body, we do need to write something. So right now, our standard is to do item, and then followed by the item that the user wants to add. Okay, let's change it to JSON. And if we look at the route, it's as /db. So let's do /db. And as you can see, so this request, it sends out a post request at this URL. And inside the body, it has an item with orange as value. And to get access to this particular orange value, we do so by using the request object again, but instead of like doing request of params, we do request of body. Request of body gives us access to the body like here. And to access the item, we do request of body.item. And so we store the item in place, and then we add the body item at this particular index. So remember, we are keeping track of the counter. And once we add the item in, we do need to increment the counter by 1 since we don't want to override the previous item. And once the counter is incremented, essentially the function is like finished. And we can do a rest.send post request successful, item placed, followed by the item. Now let's try that in real time. So let's run that again. And let's send it. Oops, it says canary property item. Huh, that's pretty weird. Let's see what's wrong. Post db. Canary property item of undefined. Huh, that's pretty weird. Let's try. Yeah, it shouldn't be like this. Huh. Oh, it's probably because, okay. I see. So we probably still do need to include those 2 lines. So yeah, and sorry about that. And essentially, for the express to properly kind of like decode the body, we do need to include these 2 lines. And these 2 lines, the first lines, they will change everything into JSON. I believe this is already automatically done for us. However, we can always include this to be sure. And second of all, URL encoded extended true. This is essentially just a way for us to kind of like make sure all the URL is properly UTF encoded so that we won't have any weird characters into our URL requests. So with these 2 lines in place, let's try to run that again. Okay. If we hit send again, as you can see, it says post request successful. item place orange. Okay, so essentially what this post request route is doing is it first of all gets the orange value and then assign into the stupid DB, and then it log it back. And since we can already add items into our database, let's try to add something else. Let's try to add an apple. As you can see, it says item place apple. Let's also add a banana. All right, now we have these fruits in place. Let's run our get request again. So first of all, let's get our current index. And so let's go to /info/index. We're sending a get request. As you can see, right now the counter is 3 because we have 3 fruits inside the stupid DB. We can also change it to capacity and send it again. As you can see, it's also 3. And if we visit db/all, as you can see, right now inside stupid DB, there are 3 items. First is the orange. Well, zeros is orange. The first is apple, and the second is banana. Okay, this kind of like acts as a proof that we have successfully make sure all the items are added into our database. We can try to add another thing inside. So for instance, lemon, send. We can send the get R again. As you can see, the lemon now shows back. And since this is not really a real database, if we stop the server and rerun it again, if we send the /all again, as you can see, it becomes empty bracket. This is because every time we run the server, the database will be initialized to a default kind of like empty bracket. Once we learn how to use a database, we can store all this information actually on a database, and then all the information will be preserved, even if the server is down. So this is our very first post request. Do we have any questions, concerns? All right. Now, with the post request in place, we have already accomplished quite a lot. Right now, we can add items in, and we can get back all the items. However, say the user make a typo. For instance, lemon, they do lemon. And they want to update this particular item to lemon again. And there's right now no way to do that. And to make sure they're able to update a particular item, let's create a put request. So usually put request is used to update any items. Okay. And for this particular pull request, we're also matching the URL parameters. So for instance, if the user wants to in our case, is to update the first item, then we need to visit /1. So this essentially indicates that we're going to update the first item. And also we need to include something in the body. So instead of lemon, we need to do lemon. Okay, let's change it to JSON. Okay. So this will be how our pull requests look like. And how our pull requests work under the hood is that first of all, we'll get the ID. This is similar to the previous GET requests that we have written. And although we have actually never used it before, I just realized, I guess this is a good time to use it. So let's create another GET request. And let's get the first item. So as you can see, in our in this GET request, it returns level. Okay, and right now we're just running the GET request. This is essentially like if we put 1 after it, it will only return the value corresponding to the index 1. Now let's go back to the put request. So we are getting the index of the data similar to how we are getting the index of data here. We do it by request of parameter ID. And since we also need to get the kind of like the value inside the body, we're also doing request of body.item. And we are also doing a check, so saying if the ID is in the StupidDB database, we insert it. Otherwise, we will just send back an error message saying that no object is found with this particular ID. And if the update is successful, we return a new item, followed by kind of like the actual item value. So let's do that. And if we hit send, as you can see, it returns new item lemon. And let's try to run the db/all again to see whether this is like updated successfully or not. So let's run this again. As you can see, we have lemon. Let's try to update this again. So this time, let's try to update the zeros item to apple. If we send it, as you can see, it says new item apple. And if we send it again here, it says 0 apple, 1 lemon. Okay, so this is our put request. Do we have any questions so far? All right. Now I believe we have covered all of the requests that we're going to do. Let's talk about Axios. And Axios is a very, very good tool for us to send requests to other people. And so right now, all the app.get methods and app.put, app.post, they're all handling kind of like requests directed to us. However, say we're interested in, for instance, the NASA API, and we want to kind of like get some data from NASA. What we are going to do. First of all, let's actually take a look at the NASA API. So this is kind of like my favorite API. It's run by NASA, and you can have access to this by going like NASA API, by Googling NASA API. And it's right here. They are all free to use. And right now, I'm not using my own key. I'm using the demo key. And so for this particular API request, it's if we send a GET request to this URL here, we will get the astronomical picture of the day information. So as you can see, the astronomical data of the day today is this particular picture. And with the title, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's some star cluster. And yeah, let's say we're interested in this information and we want to simply return all the information back to our user. What should we do? So in order to do this, we need the help of Axios. Since we already installed it, let's import it here. And let's add this routing. This route will be doing the route at /NASA. And how we're going to use this Axios package is by calling Axios.get. And Axios function very, very similar to Express. So say we want to create a GET request, we can simply do Axios.get followed by the URL of the request. If we want to send a post request, we can just do Axios.post. Okay, right now we're doing GET request. So once we send a GET request, we can follow it by using .then method. So the .get request, it returns some promises. And so essentially promise is kind of like a delayed object. Since all the communication across the internet, they do require some time. Promise is kind of like, we will promise there will be some variable here, but it's not here right now. And to use this promise variable, we can do .then. We can use .then method after the .get request. So .then is saying that if the .get request went through, what we are going to do. And what we are going to do is simply to return the response.data back to the user. So essentially like return all the data back to our user. And if there's something wrong happening during the GET request, we will catch the error and send the error back to our user. Okay. Now let's try to use, let's try to see. So let's send a GET request to /NASA. Actually, I forgot to rerun it. And if we hit send, as you can see, we have a bunch of data. The astronomical picture of the day returned. As you can see, the Palomar globular star cluster is returned here. And so yeah, this is how we will use Axios. Essentially, if you want to send any kind of request, you just do Axios followed by the request type, followed by the URL that you're sending. If the request contains any body, you can simply follow the URL by a curly bracket, and anything that go inside the curly bracket will be the body of the request. Any questions for how to use Axios? All right. Let me just double check. All right, great. Now let's move on to the final topic of today. We're going to talk about Node and also file system. So this is kind of like a main difference between Node and JavaScript inside browser. So essentially, Node is able to create files on a computer. Now, let's say we want to build an API where the user can input the name and the type of a file, and the server can create it, okay? And the API request that the user will send is through this link. So it's through this link. Oops, let me copy the wrong thing here again. Okay, yeah, it's through this link. And this link has two URL parameters. The first is a name parameter, And second is the type parameter. And this actually these two are called queries. It's not really parameters. Sorry about that. And we access them differently. Okay. And let's try to build an app.get request. So let's say we want to create it under create. So request response. Since we are going to create a file with name like this, for instance, here it's resume and type text, we do need to get those two values. And how do we get these two values? Is by using request.query.name. Okay, so instead of doing params, if the URL is like something like question mark followed by name and value pair, instead of doing params, we need to do query. And let's do type as well. Type. And right now we have name and type in place. We also need to add a file. We first of all create a file name by concatenating a dot between name and type. So for instance, if we want to create like resume.txt, we do need a dot between name and type. And then we use the fs package. The fs package is called a file system package. Okay, we do need to import it here. So let's import it right here. And let's actually go ahead and install it as well. So npm ifs. Okay. Right now it's installed. And let's see. So the file system, how the file system package work is that you call fs.append followed by the file name, and then followed by, I think this is a route. I need to double check actually. We can double check here. Oh, so this is a data. Yeah, so this is a data to write. And we don't really need any data for now. Let's just make it empty. And it also takes a callback function. The callback function is essentially a function that will be run once the append file is ended. And the callback function is pretty straightforward. It says that if there's any error, we send an error. Otherwise, we send back a message saying, first of all, the file is created with name and also the type returned. So let's try to create a GET request and see this in action. So let's copy and paste here. And let's say we want to send a GET request and create a resume.txt. If we send, oops, we haven't rerun the server. So if we run the server and if we hit send, as you can see, it says message created, a file created with name resume and also type text. And if we look at the folder right now here, as you can see, is there's an empty resume.txt file created. We can also go ahead, let's say create resume type equals PDF. And if we send it again, as you can see, it shows resume.pdf. However, it does show it's a corrupted PDF file because like PDF file, they do require some data in it. We don't really have any data, so it says it's corrupted, but it's all right. So this is how we will work with query and how we can work with the file system using Node. Do we have any questions? If you have any questions in general or for this lecture, feel free to say it out loud now as well, because this indeed is the end of our lecture. And I will share the attendance form right now. So 1 second. Okay, so this is our attendance form. I've sent it in chat. And the magic word today is index.js. Remember to fill out the form so that we can keep track of your attendance. And if you don't have any questions, feel free to leave.